Now, we've known for a very long time that rape and sexual violence are weapons of war. The history books are littered with references to the spoils of war or rape and pillage, and nothing can wreck the reconstruction of a war-torn community more than the rape of women and the birth of children fathered by an enemy. But it was not until the Yugoslav conflict in the early 90s that rape was acknowledged by the United Nations as a war crime. And it was only in 2008 that the UN Security Council adopted Resolution 1820, which says that sexual violence in conflict zones is a matter of international peace and security. Well, next month the UK will host the first G8 Foreign Ministers meeting to discuss the subject. The move is led by the Foreign Secretary William Hague, who launched a Preventing Sexual Violence initiative last year and has just returned from a tour of Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo. He joins us from the Foreign Office. Foreign Secretary, what's made you so passionate about this subject?
Well, a number of things over the years, really. First of all, my own experiences of meeting people, starting in Darfur in Sudan in 2006, meeting women in refugee camps who were raped regularly, systematically, when going out to collect firewood. Then my own learning as Foreign Secretary over the last few years, looking at how we resolve conflict and prevent conflict, seeing how when systematic rape is used as a weapon of war, it's harder to resolve that conflict and for nations and societies to heal afterwards, which affects all the rest of our conflict prevention work. And then what particularly triggered off this initiative, adding to those thoughts, was the film that Angelina Jolie produced last year, and this is why I've teamed up with her on this subject, The Land of Blood and Honey, which was about the conflict in Bosnia, and a very, very powerful film about the impact and the extent of rape as a weapon of war. And in the case of the Bosnian War, 20 to 50,000 women raped, also of men and children as well, with only 30 prosecutions ever taking place.
And what sort of stories did you hear in Rwanda and the DOC that may have hardened your resolve?
Well, we met some wonderful, resilient people, but their stories are horrific. They have been through hell. We met a woman, very, very capable woman on Tuesday in the DRC, in the eastern Congo, who had actually been elected to be the captain, if you like, the precinct captain of 60 huts in the refugee camp, which is most unusual in that same Congolese society for a woman to be elected like that. But she sat in her hut and told us about her experience and said, "We are treated like animals. We are raped like animals. Please help us." And we, the United Kingdom, are one of the very few countries in the world that has the reach and the power, the resources, the standing in the world to do something about this situation. And that's why I've put it so firmly on the agenda of the G8. A country like ours, with our embassies all around the world, our seat on the UN Security Council, our very large development budget, can really move the dial on an issue like this and change the whole global atmosphere on it. And that's what I'm setting out to do.
Now, when you launched the initiative, you wanted more prosecutions of perpetrators. Why did you believe that would deter sexual violence in conflict if perpetrators were arrested and put in prison?
Well, it will deter them over time, of course. This takes time, but I'm confirmed in that view by what I've seen this week, actually, in the DRC and Rwanda, because on the ground, what people are asking for is an end to impunity, an end to the idea that there's really no justice and no retribution for anybody involved in these sorts of crimes. And so making it, as I hope to make these crimes, a grave breach of the Geneva Convention, so that international justice can be more effective, and equipping people in their own societies to be able to gather the evidence, document and preserve the evidence more easily than they can now. That, I think, will all make a difference over time. But it's a vast problem. Well, clearly we're not going to solve this next week, but we can make enormous progress each day, that combats this terrible evil over the coming years.
One of the leading charities, Care International UK, suggests that prosecutions are not the priority, but that women's physical and psychological needs should come first. How persuaded are you by that argument?
Well, these are not mutually exclusive, of course, and I can assure you that of the women I've met in the Congo this week, their own psychological needs would be part of their own psychological need is to know that justice can be done, and that there is a justice system and a prison system in their society that will be able to deal with this, which there isn't at the moment. So these things are connected, actually. But yes, of course, the care for people, and we saw good, valiant instances of this on our visit as well, is of course very important as well. And ending the stigma and the shame of this is absolutely crucial. One of the great problems at the moment is that in many of the societies where this occurs, it is those who have been raped and abused who are made to feel they have done something wrong. They are excluded from their families and society. But it's the perpetrators who have done something wrong. So these things are all connected together. I'm not saying we shouldn't do any of these things, but I think the way we can break into this is by ending the culture of impunity.
But given that women are often blamed for what has happened, what sort of risks do they face if they do come forward and take part in a legal process?
In many societies, they do face risks. That's absolutely right. And that is why it's not sufficient here just to change a few rules here and there. It will be different if we manage to make this a grave breach of the Geneva Convention, if we adopt an international protocol on the investigation of such crimes, which is another thing that I am proposing and will propose at the United Nations later this year. These things will all make a difference, but it's also important to have a change in attitudes, in fundamental attitudes. And that's why it needs a real debate on programs like yours. I'm very pleased to be able to talk about it. And in the UN Security Council itself, at the G8 summit itself, it needs to be talked about in newspapers. The fact it's talked about needs to reach into the radio stations and the discourse of the societies concerned so that the attitude changes. And it needs to be there in the training of military units in many countries, of course, particularly in Africa, but this is not just an African problem, so that it seeps into their training, into their institutions, that this is wrong.
Now, next month you'll have the G8 meeting. Not all members have exemplary human rights records. What would you expect a country like Russia to have to contribute to this debate?
Well, we're talking to them. Of course, we're working now on the communique of that meeting with the Russians, and we've had them here. We've had Russian officials here over the last few months explaining to them the purpose of what we're trying to do. We've shown them some of the evidence and the films, the documentary films about this, so that we've really introduced them to the issue. I've discussed it at some length with the Russian foreign minister already. So yes, I am hopeful that Russia will be able to support, to some extent, these initiatives. You're right that countries will vary a great deal in the importance that they attach to this, but I think now we have reached a point where we can get enough countries together to start to make a really big difference. And that again is where the UK comes in. We're one of the few countries in the world with the capability to do that, and that means we have a responsibility to do that, in my view.
Foreign Secretary, thank you very much indeed
for
joining us this morning.